I was halfway to the podium, the 4 years of sweat and raiment condensed into the crisp white of my new diploma cover, when I heard the chair scrape. It was a sharp, splitting sound that cut through the polite applause of the Portland State Auditorium. Then came the voice, loud, clear, and perfectly projected to hang over the assembled crowd. At my graduation ceremony, my sister Ariana shouted, rising from her seat and pointing at me like she was delivering a verdict from a high court. She cheated her way through college. The entire auditorium froze. Hundreds of faces, friends, professors, strangers, rotated toward me, their expressions dissolving from proud smiles to a mask of collective shock. No whisper, no hesitation. Just a clean public execution delivered by the person who knew exactly where to strike for maximum damage. I kept walking. Not toward the diploma, but toward the stage, holding together 4 years of work with nothing but breath and spine. My parents, sitting beside Ariana, looked like statues carved from fear and disbelief. In that blinding moment, Ariana became everything: the spotlight, the accusation, the noise. She cheated. Ariana repeated, even louder, desperate to command the moment. She doesn't deserve that diploma. That was the key dialogue of my life. The moment I stopped being Lola, the quiet student, and became a character in her spectacle. I walked up the final 2 steps onto the stage. Dean Matthews, who had known me for 2 semesters, met my eyes. The lights were hot. The air was thick with tension. I reached the podium. Ariana's voice was still echoing somewhere behind me, a desperate sound. Dean Matthews put the diploma in my hands, a simple, black folder. I accepted it, lifted my chin, and leaned in just an inch. It is under my seat, I whispered, keeping my voice even. The envelope marked A19. He didn't flinch. He didn't ask for clarification. He simply smiled, a small, knowing expression that said, I understand the stakes, and gave the slightest nod. That nod was the quiet beginning of the end for Ariana. I walked off the stage. The click of my heels on the wood floor, sounding like a ticking clock in the massive room. My body felt numb, operating on pure adrenaline, but my mind was laser-focused. My emotional arc, which had been characterized by avoidance, years spent trying to make myself small so Ariana could shine, was over. I was stepping out of the shadows. It felt less like a graduation and more like a theatrical confrontation. I needed air. I needed distance. The feeling of being watched, which had been a low hum for months, was now a roaring silence. This public accusation, this ultimate betrayal, stemmed from a deep emotional conflict I carried. I had always struggled to accept my own successes, believing they were somehow secondary to Ariana's inherent magnetism. Her attack forced me to realize that success was not something I could hide anymore. It was something I had to actively defend. This public moment was the first step on a journey that would force me to embrace vulnerability and, more importantly, fight for the life I had built. The whole auditorium held its breath, waiting for my collapse, but all they saw was my back as I walked away. The black gown hiding the fierce resolve beneath. I felt a cold clarity. The time for hiding was over. The time for fighting had begun. The metallic clang of the safety bar, dropping as the roller coaster car began its ascent. That was how my chest felt after leaving the stage. I was still walking, surrounded by the sudden, low, level panic of the crowd, but the real climb, the one out of Ariana's shadow, was just beginning. I didn't grow up expecting my sister to become my enemy. If anything, I spent most of my childhood trying to catch whatever light Ariana walked around with. She was the golden one, 2 years my senior, louder, brighter, effortlessly magnetic. At family dinners in Portland, relatives leaned toward her stories like sunflowers to the sun. I, Lola, the younger, quieter sibling, sat beside her, nodding, learning how to make myself small so she could shine. That was the avoidance that defined me. I was 22 years old, graduating with highest honors, yet my default emotional setting was to be guarded, to deflect attention, to live in the quiet background. My internal conflict was simple. I feared that stepping out and claiming my own light would somehow diminish hers, and that consequence felt catastrophic to our family dynamic. The shift, when it happened, was slow and quiet. By junior year of high school, my grades edged past hers. Teachers called on me more. A scholarship letter arrived with my name on it, offering nearly the full tuition cost. I remember the moment Ariana read it. The smile she gave me carried the sweetness of fruit, left out too long, edged with something sour and confusing. College made the distance wider. Geographically and emotionally. I left for campus with 2 duffel bags and a stack of psych textbooks. She stayed home after dropping out of her own graduate program. A detail she rarely discussed. I didn't think it mattered. Different paths, different timing. But the first crack appeared 6 months into my freshman year. My scholarship refund came in short. A missing amount totaling nearly $300. When I asked the financial aid office, the explanation was vague. Something about an administrative error. I asked my parents if they had heard anything from Ariana, and they exchanged a look too quick to decode, a silent conversation about something they weren't telling me. Then came the emails. A vague plagiarism complaint against an old essay. A cancelled tutoring appointment with a name I didn't recognize. A mysterious notice about a meeting with Professor Hale that I had never scheduled. Small things at first, easy to shrug off. Easy to blame on the chaos of being an overstressed college student. But they built on each other, subtle weight after subtle weight, pressing down on my reputation. I felt people watching me in the hallways, with the hesitation of someone approaching a cracked mirror. My friend and roommate, Quinn Reynolds, was the first to notice the emotional toll. Quinn was 2 years older than me and fiercely independent. Majoring in engineering. She was the Sarah Cooper of my life, a loyal presence with a hidden strength. One night in our studio apartment, she whispered, "Lola, you're checking your phone, like you're waiting for something bad to happen." I didn't know how to explain to Quinn that I wasn't waiting for bad news. I was waiting for a pattern. I kept hoping it wasn't Ariana. That my sister, the golden girl who used to braid my hair before school, couldn't possibly be behind all of it. This hope, rooted in my reluctance to confront the painful truth about my own family, kept me emotionally guarded. But hope, I was learning, had a way of blinding you right before the final, public blow. And that blow, as the graduation ceremony proved, landed on the one day she knew I couldn't defend myself without destroying the moment. The tension of avoidance was tightening into a knot of dread. The fear of seeing the pattern, the denial I had clung to. In the first subtle stages of sabotage, vanished in the months leading up to graduation. It was like living inside a room where someone kept dimming the lights, not enough to plunge me into darkness, just enough to make me perpetually question what I was seeing. Every time I thought the worst was behind me, something new slipped under the door. It started with a second, larger adjustment to my scholarship payments. This time it was $3,000 gone, with another confusing administrative explanation. Then came a notice about a missing ethics form I was certain I had already submitted. Then, one Tuesday morning, my entire campus login locked me out for repeated suspicious activity. I stared at the login screen in my shared dorm studio, my pulse climbing as if the digital system itself were screaming that I didn't fully belong anymore. That sense of professional safety, the belief that hard work guaranteed security, was dissolving. This rising tension, fueled by the feeling of being hunted, forced me to guard myself even more fiercely, rejecting the instinct to talk about it openly. The climax of this initial phase of sabotage arrived when Professor Hale, the head of the behavioral psychology department, called me into his office. The room smelled of old paper and lukewarm coffee. He folded his hands carefully on his desk. "A complaint came through, Lola," he said, his tone measured. "Someone claims you plagiarized parts of your behavioral analysis report." My stomach dropped like a stone. That report had been my pride. It had taken me weeks of late nights, surviving on cold leftovers, endless corrections and cross-referencing. It was the best work I had ever produced. I opened my mouth to defend myself, but he raised a hand. "I don't believe it," he clarified, and the quiet reassurance in his voice was a lifeline. "I'm telling you this so you can prepare." Prepare for what? A slow, methodical campaign designed to chip away at my reputation. A war I didn't start. Fought in the shadows of my university email and financial accounts. Whispers began to follow me out of his office, growing louder and less dismissive than before. Even a classmate from freshman year gave me a strange, assessing look in the hallway, as if trying to reconcile the honor student he knew with the rumor he'd heard. A girl in my lab group avoided eye contact entirely. Even Quinn, who trusted me by instinct, looked worried. "You don't think someone is actually targeting you, right?" she asked me one night. "I don't know," I answered. But I did know. I just didn't want to say Ariana's name out loud. Because saying it meant accepting the monumental depth of her betrayal. My internal conflict was boiling. The desire to protect my family's image versus the need to protect my own future. The definitive turning point came the night I found a message in my inbox. An email, apparently sent by me to a faculty assistant, canceling a critical meeting I'd been counting on for my capstone review. The tone wasn't mine. The casual, almost flippant phrasing wasn't mine. The signature was slightly off, but the damage, that was very much mine. I sat on my bed, in the half-light of our studio apartment, scrolling through old memories of Ariana, like I was watching a damaged film. The backhanded comments, the sharp smiles, the way she had always dismissed my wins as luck. The way she'd been drifting through life, since leaving her grad program, always comparing, always tallying. And somewhere between those memories, the truth formed, quiet, sharp, and undeniable. This wasn't bad timing. This wasn't randomness. Someone was choreographing my downfall piece by piece. The deep emotional conflict of denial finally shattered, replaced by cold resolve. The avoidance had ended. The realization that my downfall was being choreographed was a profound internal shift, transforming my quiet dread into cold, hard resolve. I wasn't just anxious anymore, I was preparing for war. I drove home that weekend. Not to seek comfort, but to confirm the fracture. I found my dad in the backyard, standing by the old fence he had been meaning to fix for years. He was watering the hydrangeas like the world wasn't closing in on the life I had built. The smell of damp earth and blooming petals was achingly normal. "Dad," I started, keeping my voice low and steady. "Has Ariana ever said anything about me? About school?" He paused, the water trickling onto his worn gardening shoes, and took a moment too long to look up. "She's been tense," he admitted, his voice rough. "Said you get everything handed to you. Easy." I watched him. "Did she say anything else?" "I told her that wasn't fair, Lola." He swallowed hard. "The rest didn't matter." But it did. The fracture was already there. His gentle denial, his inability to see the depth of Ariana's resentment, was proof that I could not rely on my family to protect me. I left the house that day with a painful, but clear purpose. Back on campus, I made my decision. No more guessing. No more hoping I was wrong. I needed proof. I needed someone who dealt in undeniable facts, not feelings. I reached out to a tech investigator, named Marcus Harris. He was the Marcus Harris of my outline. A friend of a friend known for his wit, and for being able to find ghosts in a machine. He had a reputation for being secretive and closed off, and he carried a hidden emotional scar that made him keenly perceptive of betrayal. We met at a coffee shop in downtown Portland. Marcus was late 30s, sharp, and he just listened. Really listened, while I laid out every strange payment, every cancelled appointment, every whisper that had clung to me like smoke. When I finished, he tapped the edge of his laptop. "If someone's been in your accounts, they left footprints, Lola. People always do." His calm professionalism was exactly the anchor I needed. 3 days later, he called me back to his shared workspace downtown. The place buzzed with the low conversations of other freelance tech workers and the hum of old vents. But on Marcus's screen, everything was razor sharp. "These are your login logs," he said, pointing to a column of timestamps. "Except here, here, and here. Those aren't yours." He zoomed in. The access came from another device on a home network in Portland. My chest tightened. I didn't want him to say the obvious. He said it anyway. "The same network where your parents live." Something in me curled inward. Like my ribs were trying to shield my heart from the blow. He wasn't accusing them directly. But there was only one person in that house who had ever memorized my passwords, my security questions, my habits. Marcus scrolled again, revealing another window. "There's more. The payments missing from your scholarship refund. Someone rerouted them twice." He opened a list of transactions tagged under my campus account. "And these tutoring accusations, they were sent using a mirrored email. 1 character off from yours. That's intentional." Intentional. The word felt surgical, clean, and definitive. The evidence Marcus provided was the definitive end of my emotional guard, forcing me to embrace vulnerability. The truth. For the first time, the quiet dread inside me had transformed into an unshakable resolve. Leaving Marcus's shared workspace, I was shaking, the phone buzzing in my pocket, with a text from Quinn that read, "You okay? You've been quiet." I couldn't respond. Not yet. I needed headspace, something steady to hold on to. Because the evidence Marcus had provided, the undeniable facts of Ariana's intentional sabotage, had rocked me to my core. Instead of answering Quinn, I drove straight to my parents' house, parking in the driveway. I sat there for 20 minutes, staring at the porch light flickering under the early summer sky, a familiar symbol of home that now felt utterly hostile. My father found me there eventually. "Lola, what's going on?" he asked. His voice laced with the concern of a man who senses a coming disaster but doesn't know where to look. I didn't tell him everything. Not the transaction logs, not the mirrored emails, not the network address. Just enough. That scholarship money that went missing. The plagiarism complaint. "Dad, someone has been in my accounts, systematically messing with my life." He swallowed hard, his eyes wide. "Are you saying?" "I don't know what I'm saying," I lied, pulling back from the full truth. Not until I had every piece legally secured. Because the full truth would break him. He still believed Ariana was merely complicated, wounded, not cruel. He couldn't see what she was doing. Because I had spent years covering her flaws, with my quiet acceptance and a dutiful smile. The emotional beat here was a painful one, protecting my father's fragile belief in his golden child, even as she destroyed me. But I wasn't covering anything anymore. Back on campus that night, I pulled every file, every screenshot, every odd detail Marcus had confirmed. If Ariana wanted to tear down the life I built, I would protect it with everything I had left. The next morning, I contacted attorney Jessica Taylor. She was the ideal foil to my introverted nature, confident, ambitious, mid-20s, and struggling with her own family expectations of perfection. She became my unlikely ally, challenging me to step fully into my own defense. Jessica reviewed the evidence I brought, a thick folder of logs and timelines, and asked only one question, her voice crisp and controlled. "When do you want this to stop? When it's no longer just me she can hurt?" I replied. The fear was gone, replaced by a sense of direction. That was when the shift happened, quiet, but absolute. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was preparing. Graduation was 2 weeks away. Jessica helped me prepare a brief, but devastating statement outlining the facts of the digital sabotage. We printed copies of all the logs and transaction evidence. I tucked the evidence into a thick, sealed manila envelope, labeled with the code Marcus had given me, a 19. It was ready. For the first time in months, I felt something other than fear or dread. I felt direction. I was actively embracing the vulnerability of fighting back, realizing that the only way to escape the shadow was to confront it head-on. The rising tension of the campaign of sabotage had crested, and now, the tension of the counter-strategy had begun. The conflict had shifted from covert, online attacks to overt legal preparation. The 2 weeks leading up to graduation passed, as if I were living in 2 timelines at once. In one, I was Lola, the normal graduating student, returning my dorm key, finishing my last few assignments, and trying on my cap and gown in front of the mirror, still the quiet, internally conflicted girl. In the other timeline, I was a strategist, preparing for a quiet war that Ariana didn't know she had already lost. The evidence, the thick manila envelope labeled A19, was secured. Jessica Taylor had coached me on what to expect, focusing on the simple power of composure in the face of chaos. My main goal was not to win the argument in the hall, but to ensure the evidence reached the academic board the moment Ariana initiated her public attack. The night before the ceremony, I barely slept. The sky outside my studio was a deep, cloudless blue, the kind that made the world feel paused and expectant. I laid out everything: the sealed envelope of evidence, the printed login logs Marcus had verified, the capstone summary, and my gown. My hands didn't shake, not anymore. They had the hard, earned steadiness of someone finally stepping out of survival mode and into the role of the person in control. At sunrise, I slipped the envelope into the inner lining of my gown, placing it deep inside the fabric where it wouldn't shift. The weight felt reassuring, heavy with the truth. I walked out the door, leaving behind the small studio that had been the stage for so much paranoia and fear. The university auditorium in Portland was already buzzing by the time I arrived. Students hugged each other, their faces alight with genuine joy. Parents fanned themselves with programs. Faculty lined up in regalia. Everything looked festive and hopeful, and underneath it all, a slow pulse of dread tapped in my chest. This dread was no longer fear of Ariana, but fear of what her performance would force me to reveal about my family. When my parents and sister arrived, I saw it instantly. Ariana wasn't dressed like someone attending a graduation. She was dressed like someone hosting the event. She wore a striking white blazer, dramatic makeup, and a posture that was too rehearsed, too ready for the cameras. She scanned the room, eyes darting, hungry for attention she hadn't yet earned. Mom waved first, too brightly, her smile strained. Dad hugged me tight, a lingering, protective gesture that told me he sensed the impending storm, though he didn't know the nature of the fight. Ariana stood behind them, arms folded. "Congrats," she said smoothly, her eyes cool. "Big day, Lola." "Yeah," I replied, keeping my voice even, refusing to rise to her bait. "Huge." Her smile flickered, sharp, predatory. And for a brief second, I saw the full plan in her eyes. She didn't come to celebrate. She came to strike. She wanted to destroy me publicly, using the biggest, most formal audience available. I took my seat on the stage with the honors students. From up there, the crowd looked like a single breathing organism. The lights warmed my face, and a strange, profound calm settled in my bones. Dean Matthews, a kind, steady man who also served as my department head, met my eye from his seat. We had spoken the night before, and he knew what I had done and why. He gave the slightest, almost imperceptible nod. The ceremony began. Speeches were given, applause swelled and dipped. My name was alphabetically toward the end of the procession, which meant Ariana had a wide, open stage of time to decide how she would ruin the day. The tension in the auditorium, built not from the ceremony, but from the silent, contained conflict between two sisters, a conflict that was about to explode into the most important public moment of my life. This build-up created the maximal intensity required for the coming confrontation. The long wait on the stage felt like an eternity. I sat through the dean's address, the commencement speaker's advice, and the seemingly endless procession of names, knowing that Ariana was calculating the perfect, dramatic moment to strike. When the presenter finally called my name, Lola Hart, The sound was muffled by the sudden, sharp scrape of wood on linoleum. I had anticipated the attack, but the sheer force of Ariana's delivery still slammed into the silence. At my graduation ceremony, she screamed, her voice tearing through the auditorium like fabric. My sister stood up and shouted. She cheated her way through college. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Faculty froze in their seats. The air was sucked out of the enormous room. I watched phones lift instantly. Bright rectangles capturing the spectacle she wanted so desperately to create. She doesn't deserve that diploma. Ariana shouted again, louder this time, her arm extended, finger pointing directly at me. She lied. She manipulated the system. Ask anyone. Dozens of faces rotated toward me, their expressions shifting instantly from joy to shock to confusion. It was a sea of eyes, all asking the same single, devastating question: is it true? I stood. Every step down the aisle felt deliberate, measured. The click of my heels a kind of countdown. I didn't look at Ariana. Not because I feared what she would say next, but because I already knew everything she was about to lose. I refused to let her pull me into her emotional chaos. My emotional arc had reached its pivot point. I was no longer avoiding conflict, but embracing the strategic use of composure. Students shifted to let me through. Some whispered, some stared openly, but a significant number looked away entirely, as if my humiliation might be contagious. But humiliation was not what lived in me anymore. It was purpose. It was the calm clarity that comes when one has absolute proof. Dean Matthews waited at the podium with a steady expression, his hands resting lightly on the stack of diplomas, including mine. When I reached him, the room was still pulsing with the shock of Ariana's accusations. "Lola Hart," he said, his voice calm and clear, cutting through the remaining tension. "I accepted my diploma, the official gesture of 4 years of honest work, and lifted my chin. I leaned in just an inch, closer than necessary for a polite conversation. It is under my seat," I whispered, keeping my voice low and completely steady. The envelope marked a 19. He didn't flinch. He didn't ask for clarification. He simply smiled, small and knowing, and gave a decisive nod. That nod was the absolute climax. The exact moment the public narrative began to flip. Behind us, security moved discreetly. A faculty member approached the row where Ariana still stood, chest heaving. Her dramatic makeup cracking under the heat of her own desperate performance. She didn't realize the room was no longer hers. Not after the dean's nod. Not after the evidence waiting beneath my chair. As I walked off the stage, the energy shifted palpably. The whispers changed. A woman in the second row lowered her phone, frowning not at me, but at Ariana. A professor shook his head. A reporter for the local paper leaned forward, scribbling furiously. Ariana sensed the shift, too. "What?" she barked, her voice wobbling, the predatory edge replaced by genuine fear. "You all saw it. She didn't deny anything. She just stood there." She didn't understand that sometimes silence is not an admission of guilt. Sometimes, silence is the ultimate strategy. Security reached her row. One of them spoke softly, offering her a choice: cooperate or step out. But Ariana didn't do soft. "You're all blind!" she screamed, pointing again, desperation shattering her polished exterior. "She's been lying for years." But the crowd wasn't with her anymore. They had seen me walk calm and steady. They had seen the dean nod. They were now witnessing Ariana completely unravel, and unravel she did. Her voice cracked first, then her hands. Then the control she'd always believed she had over me, over our family, over the narrative. Security gently guided her toward the side aisle. It wasn't harsh or aggressive. It was simply the natural, legal conclusion of her own malicious choices. When she reached the doors at the back of the auditorium, she turned one last time, eyes hot with disbelief. "You think this is over? Lola," she spat. "You think that little whisper makes you innocent?" I didn't look back. I didn't need to, because the truth, backed by irrefutable evidence, was already moving quietly, legally, and irrevocably through the channels of the academic board. The dramatic, public conflict was resolved in the moment. I chose strategy over spectacle. After the ceremony, I met Dean Matthews and Jessica Taylor backstage. The dean held the envelope marked A19, which had been retrieved immediately. He looked tired but firm. "This is serious, Lola," he said gently, confirming the weight of the evidence. "So was what she did," I replied, my voice steady. Jessica arrived minutes later. Her presence crisp and controlled, the ideal professional counterpoint to the family drama. She reviewed the contents quickly. The log statements, the transaction evidence showing the rerouted scholarship funds, the screenshots of the mirrored emails. "She won't be able to spin this," Jessica stated, closing the folder with a snap. "Not in front of the academic board, not in civil court, not anywhere." And just like that, the final stage of Ariana's plan collapsed. Not because I had shouted or fought her on the floor of the auditorium, but because I had refused to fight on her terms, opting instead for fact, patience, and legal strategy. The university investigation launched the following morning. The evidence provided by Marcus was irrefutable. By the end of the week, Ariana was banned from campus, pending a final review. 2 professors came forward with suspicious emails they had dismissed earlier, now understanding the pattern. The scholarship office traced the rerouted payments directly to accounts tied to her device. When Marcus submitted his final digital report, the board didn't need more than a single meeting. Ariana's sabotage was undeniable. Her outburst at graduation, the very spectacle she thought would destroy me, became the clearest evidence of her motive, obsession, and malicious intent. In the quiet after the storm, something unexpected happened. I didn't feel victorious. I felt free. The academic board issued its findings quickly. Ariana had accessed my accounts, redirected funds, fabricated emails, and attempted to interfere with my academic standing. She was officially banned and referred for civil action to recover the money. When Jessica filed the restitution claim, the evidence was so clean the negotiations barely lasted an hour. My parents didn't take it well. Shock, denial, then quiet, heavy acceptance when the official paperwork left no room for imagination. Dad called one evening, his voice thick with grief. "I should have seen it, Lola," he whispered. "I truly should have. I didn't blame him." Ariana had always known how to hide in the spaces where parental love blurred into assumption. I moved to a small apartment in Corvallis soon after. Nothing fancy, but sunlight poured through the windows every morning. I bought a second-hand table, adopted a black and white cat who immediately took ownership of every chair, and slowly let my life become simple again. For the first time in years, my days weren't shaped by fear, by avoidance, or by the need to second-guess every success. I studied, I walked, I breathed, and little by little, the space Ariana, once filled with chaos, became something gentler room to rebuild myself on my own terms. The emotional conflict of avoidance was fully resolved, replaced by the embrace of genuine vulnerability and self-acceptance. If there's one thing I learned, it's that telling the truth isn't about winning an argument. It's about finally stepping out of the shadows someone else built for you. Ariana's choices shape my pain, but they don't shape my future. I built that myself, piece by piece, with proof, patience, and a refusal to shrink any longer.